Good day, viewers out there, and welcome to the sixth episode of Climate Connect Nigerian podcast. The aim of this podcast is to bring awareness of climate-related issues to you, the viewers out there, about how climate change is affecting Nigerians across different communities. I am your host, Afagated, and with me in the studio is Mr. Teso Tafa. Mr. Teso is an environmental enthusiast and a community activist, and he will be discussing with us about climate change adaptation, especially as it relates to agriculture and migration. Stay tuned to this podcast.
Thank you, Mr. Ted, for having me on the show.
Okay, so Mr. Teso, what do you think are the most significant climate-related challenges facing communities in northeastern Nigeria?
Well, in my assessment, I feel the most significant climate challenges facing people in the northeast part of Nigeria is reduced rainfall, rising temperatures, and shorter farming seasons.
Okay.
And these are all occasioned as a result of the climate changes that we are experiencing. The reduced rainfall brings about drought, and when there is drought, it affects the farming seasons as well.
Yeah.
So in the long run, communities that rely on farming predominantly are forced out of their farming business, and since it's their means of livelihood, it's like they are mostly subsistence farmers. So at the end of the day, it causes it affects, greatly impacts food productivity and increases food security has effect on food security.
Okay, Mr. Teso, so you have mentioned a variety of problems that community people are facing, especially farmers. They are facing drought, they are facing desertification, low rainfall, and all of that.
Yeah.
And then this leads us to another problem, which is migration.
Yeah.
You see that because the rainfall is low, or there's shortage of it, the lands are getting dry, there's irregular rainfall, and then the farming systems are also affected, right?
Yeah.
So you see that there's a migration from the rural communities to the urban centers.
Yeah.
So what do you think the government can do to, in a way, curb this migration of our youthful population from the rural areas that are supposed to actually be productive with farm activities? And what do you think are the support systems that should be given to farmers that are being impacted negatively by climate change?
Okay. Well, I feel in communities that are adversely affected by climate change and there is flood, maybe sometimes drought in place, I feel the government can establish a system where there will be irrigation farming,
yes,
to be able to enable these farmers farm round
all
year, so that there will be ample water supply to them, so they're able to irrigate their farms when there is drought or during the dry season. And I also feel there should be some kind of innovative way of farming that the government can be able to educate the people on. And there are some kind of
like climate resilient agricultural practices.
Yeah, there are crops that are able to endure and survive during dry season, so they can be more advocacy for them and more support to the farmers to be able to make use of this or plant these crops that will be able to survive during these challenges, these climate change challenges. And the crops are particularly root crops and tuber crops. These crops are particularly resilient crops when it comes to adapting in very harsh conditions where there is no enough water supply or rainfall.
Mr. Terry, looking at the northeast region has one of the highest temperatures in Nigeria. So you see that there's a lot of heat waves in the northeastern state like Maiduguri, Borno State, and then Adamawa State here with years. So what do you think are the implications of climate change on our health?
Well, the implications of climate change on our health is very, very severe, because like you said about the heat wave, it causes heat stress as well. And there are lots of diseases that maybe they are vector-borne diseases as well that kind of thrive in those kind of conditions. So you can tell that from that regards, there are lots of health challenges that would arise. Sometimes even from when there are rising temperatures, we have health cases like meningitis, that outbreak of meningitis, and we have the spread of cholera sometimes, and even some vector-borne diseases like malaria gets to spread and thrive in those kind of areas.
Good.
Sometimes.
Now you mentioned vector-borne diseases like malaria and the rest. You know, we have this seasonal malaria outbreak, where a lot of people suffer from. So, with having this in mind, how do you think, or what do you think the government should do so that they integrate climate change, the consequences that we're suffering from climate change, into the health sector? How do you think the government should go about promoting planning that factors in the effects of climate change on people?
Well, I think there has not been enough publicity in that regard. There should be proper funding. The government should create a more appropriate channel where that channel will be used to reach out to people in those vulnerable communities, and there should be proper advocacy about the climate change effects that arise as a result of whatever is happening globally.
Okay.
So if we have those support systems in place and proper advocacy that will be able to reach out to these communities, and more funds that will be deployed in that regard to carry out mitigation approaches that will be able to help those people in those kind of situations, I believe that's the way to go about it.
Mr. Teso, what financing mechanisms can you think the government can look into in order to fund climate adaptation project within the Northeast in order to also boost the economy?
Well, I feel the government can create climate change funds that should be assessed by people to be able to carry out some kind of climate resistant projects or provide infrastructures that are climate resilient in terms of building infrastructures like buildings and roads that are climate resilient. And I believe there's also the green bond funds that can also there should be awareness campaigns towards that so that people will be aware of green bond funds, that they can also be able to access them and carry out execution of projects that are climate resilient.
Okay, so do you think the Northeast region has a policy framework that they can use in addressing climate change mitigation and adaptation? Do you think there's a framework that is guiding how we are combating climate change in the Northeast?
Over time, there have been consistent drive or campaign for tree planting and some kind of afforestation measures that will be able to combat the encroachment of the desert that is coming in from the Sahel. So, but I think the government has to be more deliberate and intentional towards setting up commissions that will be able to have proper funding, that will be able to carry out its mandate of ensuring that there are proper advocacies and campaigns and other efforts that will be made towards mitigating the challenges that arise from all these climate change issues that we have at hand today. The government can create green bonds, and there should be climate change funds that can be assessed by people to be able to carry out or implement projects that are climate resilient in nature, you know. So climate resilient infrastructures can be built. These are in areas of roads and infrastructures that are able to withstand the adverse effects of climate whenever these things come up. So I feel when these things are done, can go a long way in mitigating the challenges of climate change. And also, when it comes to financing adaptation projects, a national climate change policy can be adopted, and as well as international collaborations can be sought from people with expertise in the field to be able to provide their own insights and solutions on how these climate-related challenges can be dealt with.
So, Mr. Teso, thank you for availing yourself to this podcast. To our viewers out there, this is much we can take on this Climate Connect Nigerian podcast. See you in our next episode. Thank you. I remain your host, Afaga Tej.